The stagecoach lurched to a violent halt outside the San Jose, California trading post, and Olivia Lawson pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack right through her ribs. June of 1878 had brought her across an entire continent, from the crowded streets of Boston to this sun-baked frontier town where the air smelled of cattle and sagebrush, where her future husband waited. A man she had never seen except in a single faded photograph that made him look stern and impossibly tall. She smoothed down her traveling dress, aware that 3 days of dust and sweat clung to the fabric, aware that she was small, barely 5 feet tall in her boots, aware that the man who had sent for her had written in his letters about wanting a sturdy woman to help run a ranch that sprawled across hundreds of acres. The driver opened the door, and Olivia stepped down carefully, her legs stiff from the endless hours of travel. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, and she shaded her eyes with one hand, scanning the handful of people gathered near the trading post. A tall man in a black suit and string tie separated himself from the others, his face hardening as he approached. She knew before he spoke that this was Thomas Henderson, the man whose advertisement she had answered 4 months ago, when desperation and loneliness had driven her to consider a future in a place she had never imagined living. "Miss Lawson." His voice carried the flat disappointment of a man inspecting livestock that failed to meet his expectations. His gaze traveled down her frame and back up again, and something cold settled in his expression. "You are considerably shorter than your letter indicated." Olivia felt heat rush to her cheeks, not from the California sun, but from humiliation that burned hotter than any weather. "I wrote that I was of average height, Mr. Henderson. I never claimed to be tall. Average for a child, perhaps." He crossed his arms over his chest, and she could see other people beginning to stare, could feel their curiosity like fingers poking at her dignity. "I need a woman who can work a ranch, Miss Lawson. Someone who can reach the high shelves in the barn, someone who can handle the physical demands of this life. I apologize for any inconvenience, but this arrangement will not work." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had spent every cent she had on the journey west. Her tiny room in Boston had been given to another seamstress the moment she left. Her sister had married and moved to Philadelphia, and there was no one, nothing, waiting for her back east. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and she gripped the handle of her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles went white. "You cannot simply reject me here in the street," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I traveled 3,000 miles based on your word, Mr. Henderson. Based on a contract we both signed. A contract made under false pretenses." His tone was final, dismissive. "I will pay for a room at the boarding house for 3 nights. After that, you will need to make your own arrangements." He pulled a few bills from his pocket and thrust them at her, and when she did not take them immediately, he let them flutter to the dusty ground at her feet. She watched him walk away. This man who had written such careful letters about his ranch, about his hopes for a family, about the beauty of California and the opportunities it offered. She watched until he climbed into a wagon and drove off without looking back, and only then did she bend to retrieve the money from the dirt, her hands shaking with rage and fear, and something that felt like the complete collapse of every hope she had built up over the past 4 months. An older woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair approached her, touching her elbow gently. "Come on, dear. Let me help you get settled. I run the boarding house. Name is Martha Green, and that man is a fool." Olivia followed her numbly through the streets of San Jose, barely noticing the false-fronted buildings, the horses tied to hitching posts, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. The boarding house was clean and simple, and Martha led her to a small room on the second floor with a window overlooking the main street. "You rest now," Martha said. "We will figure something out. San Jose is not a large town, but there are good people here." After Martha left, Olivia sat on the edge of the narrow bed and stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her face was pale beneath the dust, her dark hair coming loose from its pins, her brown eyes too large in her small face. She had always been tiny, had grown up with brothers who towered over her by the time they were 12, had learned to climb on stools and chairs to reach what she needed. It had never occurred to her that her height would be the thing that destroyed her chance at a new life. She allowed herself 10 minutes to cry, hard, shaking sobs that left her breathless. And then she washed her face in the basin, changed into a clean dress, and went downstairs to face whatever came next. The boarding house dining room was filled with the smell of roasted chicken and potatoes, and Martha waved her to a seat at the long table where several other residents were already eating. They were a mixed group: an older prospector with weathered skin and missing teeth, a young couple who looked barely old enough to be married, and a woman who introduced herself as a schoolteacher named Penelope Wright. They all knew why Olivia was there. News traveled fast in a town like San Jose, and Olivia could see the pity in their eyes. "Henderson is known for being particular," Penelope said carefully, passing Olivia a bowl of green beans. "He has been through 3 mail-order brides in 2 years. One was too talkative, one was too plain, and one had the audacity to suggest he hire more ranch hands instead of working her 16 hours a day." "He sounds like a horrible man," Olivia said quietly. "He is," Martha agreed, setting down a platter of chicken. "But the problem is not you, dear. You are a lovely young woman, and any sensible man would be grateful to have you." Olivia wanted to believe her, but as she lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the frontier town settling into darkness, she could not push away the fear that clawed at her chest. 3 nights Henderson had paid for. 3 nights to figure out how to survive in a place where she knew no one, had no skills beyond sewing, and no money to get anywhere else. The next morning, she woke early and dressed in her best day dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes. If she was going to find work, she needed to look capable and professional. She walked the main street of San Jose, stopping in at the general store, the bakery, the saloon, the small office where a lawyer practiced, asking everywhere if they needed help. The answers were all variations of the same refusal. Business was slow. They could barely afford to keep their current workers. They were sorry, but there was nothing available. By noon, she was exhausted and discouraged, her feet aching in her boots. She stopped by a small restaurant and bought a sandwich she could barely afford, eating it slowly on a bench outside, watching the activity of the town. Cowboys rode past, their horses kicking up dust. A wagon loaded with supplies headed toward the outskirts. 2 women in fine dresses walked arm in arm, chatting and laughing, and Olivia felt a sharp stab of envy for their easy companionship. "You look like someone who could use better news." She looked up to find a man standing a few feet away, hat in his hands, regarding her with an expression that was curious but not unkind. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of a stormy sky. His face was sun-bronzed and handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily. He wore work clothes, dusty jeans, and a chambray shirt, and there was something solid and dependable about the way he stood, feet planted firmly, shoulders relaxed. "I am not sure better news exists for me at the moment," Olivia said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. I heard about what happened with Henderson." He moved a bit closer, not crowding her but closing the distance enough that she could see the genuine concern in his expression. "I am Isaac Vaughn. I own a ranch about 5 miles from town, and I happened to be at the trading post yesterday when he turned you away. I want to say that what he did was dishonorable and cruel." "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn." She did not know what else to say. Another person offering pity did nothing to solve her very real problems. "I also want to offer you a job." He said it quickly, as if worried she would refuse before he finished speaking. "I need someone to help with the housekeeping, the cooking, the general running of the household. My ranch has been doing well and I can afford to pay a fair wage, room and board included, of course." Olivia stared at him, trying to process the words. "You want to hire me? You do not even know me. I know you traveled 3,000 miles to build a new life. I know you have been walking around town all morning asking for work, which shows initiative. I know Henderson is a fool." Isaac smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and less serious. "And I know that I am tired of burning my own meals and living in a house that has not been properly cleaned in 6 months. Why did you not hire someone before now? I have been managing on my own since my mother passed 2 years ago. She lived with me and kept the house running. After she died, I threw myself into the ranch work and let everything else fall apart." He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "I suppose I was not ready to have someone else in her space. But the house is getting to the point where it is more embarrassing than sad, and I could use the help." Olivia thought about her dwindling options, about the 2 nights she had left at the boarding house, about the vast uncertainty of her future. Working for a rancher was not the same as marrying one, but it was honest work, and it would give her time to figure out what came next. "I would need my own room," she said carefully, "and I would expect to be treated with respect. You would have the guest bedroom, which is on the opposite end of the house from mine. And Miss Lawson, I promise you would be treated with nothing but respect. I am not looking for anything inappropriate. I genuinely need help running my household." Something in his eyes, in the earnest way he spoke, made her believe him. She stood up, brushing crumbs from her skirt, and extended her hand. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Vaughn." His hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers, strong but gentle. "Please call me Isaac. And I will call you Olivia, if that is acceptable." "It is." She felt something loosen in her chest, the first small breath of relief she had experienced since arriving in California. They made arrangements for him to collect her and her belongings the following morning, and Olivia walked back to the boarding house feeling lighter than she had in days. Martha was delighted when she heard the news, and Penelope declared that Isaac Vaughn was known as one of the most decent men in the area, never causing trouble, always paying his bills on time, attending church most Sundays. "He is also handsome," Penelope added with a grin. "Half the unmarried women in San Jose have tried to catch his attention, but he has never shown interest in courting anyone." Olivia felt her cheeks warm. "I am just his housekeeper. There is nothing romantic about the arrangement." "Of course not," Penelope agreed, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. That night, Olivia packed her few belongings, mended a tear in one of her skirts, and tried not to think too hard about what it would be like to live in a house alone with a man she had just met. It was not improper, she told herself. Housekeepers lived on properties with their employers all the time. This was simply work, a means of survival, nothing more. Isaac arrived at 9 the next morning with a wagon and a friendly smile. He loaded her trunk and carpet bag into the back, helped her up onto the seat, and they set off down the road that led out of San Jose into the rolling California hills. The landscape was beautiful in a way that was completely different from Boston. Everything was golden and dry, with oak trees dotting the hillsides and mountains visible in the distance. The sky was a blue so bright it almost hurt to look at, and the air smelled of wild grasses and earth. "It is lovely here," Olivia said, and meant it. "It is." Isaac guided the horses with easy confidence. "I came out here 7 years ago, saved up enough money working other ranches to buy my own land. Started with 50 head of cattle and built from there. Now I have close to 300, plus horses, chickens, a couple of pigs." "That sounds like a lot of work for one person." "I have 2 ranch hands who help with the animals and the land, brothers named Carlos and Miguel Hernandez. Good men, hard workers. They have their own cabin on the far side of the property." He glanced at her. "You will meet them eventually, though they mostly keep to themselves." The ranch, when they reached it, was more impressive than Olivia had expected. The house was a sturdy 2-story structure built from timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. There were several outbuildings: a large barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and what looked like a workshop. Fences enclosed pastures where cattle grazed and horses moved in a corral near the barn. Isaac helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The interior of the house was dim and cool after the bright sunlight, and as her eyes adjusted, Olivia could see that he had been honest about the state of the place. The furniture was good quality but covered in dust. Dishes were stacked haphazardly on shelves in the kitchen. The floor needed sweeping. Cobwebs decorated the corners. "I know it is bad," Isaac said, sounding embarrassed. "I was not exaggerating. It is nothing that cannot be fixed with some hard work." Olivia set down her carpet bag and looked around, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. "Show me to my room and then I will get started." Her bedroom was at the back of the house, a decent-sized space with a window overlooking the pastures, a bed with a faded quilt, a dresser, and a small desk. It was simple but comfortable, and most importantly, it was hers. Isaac left her to unpack, and she changed into an older work dress before heading to the kitchen. She spent the rest of the day cleaning. She swept and scrubbed the floors, washed every dish she could find, wiped down shelves and counters, beat the dust from rugs and curtains. Isaac stayed out of her way for the most part, working outside, though he came in at midday and insisted she stop long enough to eat the sandwiches he had made. They were clumsy, thick sliced bread with cheese and dried beef, but they were edible, and she was grateful. By evening, the kitchen and main living area looked dramatically better. Olivia was exhausted, her back aching and her hands raw from the lye soap, but she felt satisfied. Isaac came in as she was setting the table for supper, and his eyes widened. "This looks incredible," he said. I had forgotten the table was actually this color. She had managed to make a simple stew from the supplies in the pantry, with potatoes and carrots and some of the dried beef, and she served it with bread that was only slightly burned. They ate together at the table, and the meal was quiet at first, both of them uncertain how to navigate this new arrangement. "Tell me about Boston," Isaac said finally. "What made you leave?" Olivia set down her spoon, considering how much to share. "My parents died when I was 19. Influenza, within a week of each other. My brothers were already married and gone, and my sister left for Philadelphia shortly after. I worked as a seamstress, but the pay was barely enough to cover rent and food. I was lonely, I suppose. And I thought perhaps there was something better waiting somewhere else. I am sorry about your parents. Thank you. It was 4 years ago now. The grief has dulled, but I still miss them." She took a sip of water. "What about you? You mentioned your mother lived here." "My father died when I was 16. My mother and I came west together, looking for a fresh start. She loved this ranch, loved California. When she passed, it was sudden. Her heart just gave out one morning while she was feeding the chickens. His voice was heavy with old sadness. I found her in the yard, and for a long time I could not go near that chicken coop without feeling like I might break apart. I understand that feeling. Olivia reached across the table without thinking and touched his hand briefly. The grief sneaks up on you when you least expect it. He looked at her hand and then at her face, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, of understanding. Then Olivia withdrew her hand and stood to clear the dishes, and the moment passed, but it left something warm in its wake. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Olivia rose early, made breakfast, cleaned the house room by room, mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden that had been neglected behind the house, learned to gather eggs from chickens that seemed determined to peck her fingers. Isaac worked the ranch, riding out before dawn and sometimes not returning until after dark, always dirty and exhausted but never complaining. When he was around the house, he was helpful, fixing a broken shelf in the pantry, replacing a cracked windowpane in her bedroom, hauling water for laundry without being asked. They talked during meals, sharing stories about their lives, their families, their hopes for the future. Olivia learned that Isaac loved to read, that his small collection of books was one of his most prized possessions. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He learned that she sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, and that she had a talent for growing things, coaxing the neglected garden back to life with patience and care. The two ranch hands, Carlos and Miguel, came by the house one evening about a week after Olivia arrived. They were polite and friendly, accepting coffee and the cookies she had baked that afternoon, answering her questions about the ranch and the area. Carlos was older, perhaps in his 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face. Miguel was younger, closer to Isaac's age, with quick hands and an easy smile. "It is good to see the house looking lived in again," Carlos said in accented but clear English. "Isaac has been alone too long." "I am just the housekeeper," Olivia said, the same thing she had told herself 100 times. Miguel exchanged a look with his brother. "Of course, but it is still good." After they left, Olivia thought about those words. It was good. The house felt like a home now, warm and welcoming. She had started baking bread regularly, and the smell filled the rooms. She had put wildflowers in vases on the table and the mantel. She had organized the books on their shelf and added cushions to the chairs. And Isaac seemed lighter somehow, smiling more, talking more, the sadness that had clung to him gradually lifting 3 weeks into her time at the ranch. Olivia was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard a horse approaching at speed. She went to the window and saw Isaac riding in fast, and her heart jumped with alarm. He dismounted quickly, leading his horse to the barn, and when he came into the house minutes later, she could see blood on his sleeve. "What happened?" She rushed to him, reaching for his arm. "It is nothing serious. Caught it on barbed wire checking the fence line." He tried to wave her off, but she was already rolling up his sleeve to examine the gash. It was deep but clean, about 3 inches long on his forearm. "Sit down," she ordered, and he obeyed, lowering himself into a chair while she gathered clean cloth, water, and the bottle of whiskey she knew he kept in the cupboard. She cleaned the wound carefully, and he hissed in pain but did not pull away. "This needs stitches. I can do it myself later." "You absolutely cannot. I will do it." She had stitched wounds before, for her brothers when they were young and reckless. Her hands were steady as she threaded a needle, and though Isaac went pale, he watched her work with something like admiration. "You are good at this," he said through gritted teeth. "I have had practice." She tied off the final stitch and bandaged his arm neatly. "You need to keep this clean and dry. Change the bandage daily." "Yes, madam." He smiled despite the pain, and she realized how close she was standing, how she could see the flecks of green in his gray eyes, how his breath stirred the loose hair at her temple. She stepped back quickly, flustered. "You should rest. I will bring you supper." But Isaac caught her hand gently with his good arm. "Thank you, Olivia, not just for this, but for everything. This house, my life, it is all better with you here." Her heart was pounding, and she did not trust her voice, so she just nodded and fled to the kitchen. She stood at the counter, hands pressed flat against the wood, trying to steady herself. This was supposed to be just a job, just a way to survive until she figured out what to do next. She was not supposed to be feeling this flutter in her chest when he looked at her, this warmth when he smiled, this desperate urge to be near him. But she was feeling all of those things, and she did not know what to do about it. Isaac was more careful over the next few days, resting his arm and letting Carlos and Miguel handle more of the heavy work. He spent more time around the house, and Olivia was acutely aware of his presence. She caught him watching her sometimes, his gaze thoughtful, and she wondered what he was thinking. One evening after supper, he asked if she would like to sit on the porch with him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had finally cooled from the heat of the day. They sat in the two rocking chairs his mother had loved, and for a while they just watched the colors fade and the stars begin to appear. "I need to tell you something," Isaac said quietly, "and I hope you will not think poorly of me for it." Olivia's stomach tightened with anxiety. "What is it?" "When I offered you the job, I truly did need a housekeeper. That was not a lie." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "But I also felt something when I saw you sitting on that bench, looking so lost and determined at the same time. I wanted to help you, yes, but I also wanted to know you. And now that I do know you, now that you have been here for nearly a month, I find myself thinking about you all the time. Wondering what you are doing, what you are thinking. Looking forward to meals just so I can talk to you." Her breath caught. "Isaac, I know this is not what you signed up for. I know you came here for a job, nothing more. But I would be a coward if I did not tell you that I care about you, Olivia, more than I should, probably, more than is sensible." He ran his hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. "You do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know." Olivia's mind was racing. She thought about the past month, about the easy companionship they had fallen into, about the way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps on the porch, about how right it felt to be here, in this place, with this man. "I care about you too," she said softly. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself this is just work, but I cannot help it. You are kind and good, and you make me laugh, and I feel safe here in a way I have not felt safe in a long time." Isaac reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I do not want to rush you. I do not want you to feel pressured because you work for me, because you live here. We can take this as slowly as you need." What if I do not want to take it slowly? The words surprised her even as she said them, but they were true. She had spent so long being cautious, being practical, and where had it gotten her? Rejected in a dusty street by a man who did not deserve her. She was tired of being afraid. Isaac stood and gently pulled her to her feet, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Then we will not take it slowly," he murmured, and he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when she pressed closer, rising on her toes to reach him better, the kiss deepened, became something fierce and certain. His arms came around her, holding her close, and she wound her hands in his hair, and for those moments, nothing existed except the two of them and this perfect connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "You are the perfect height for my arms," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Henderson was a fool. You fit against me like you were made to be here. Tears stung her eyes, happy tears this time. I think maybe I was. They spent the rest of the evening on the porch, talking and kissing and making plans. Isaac was honest that he wanted to marry her, wanted to build a life with her, but he understood she might need time. Olivia found that she did not need much time at all. She had traveled 3,000 miles to marry a stranger, and fate had given her something better, a chance to fall in love first. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. They were careful to maintain propriety, aware that they lived under the same roof and that gossip could be damaging. But they courted in all the ways that mattered. Isaac brought her wildflowers from the fields. Olivia baked his favorite foods. They rode out together on Sundays, Isaac teaching her to handle a horse properly, showing her the boundaries of his ranch and the places he loved most. A creek that ran clear and cold even in summer, a hill where you could see for miles, a grove of oak trees where his mother used to picnic. They talked about everything. Olivia told him about her dreams of having a family, of children and a home filled with laughter. Isaac shared his plans for expanding the ranch, for building a future that would last. They discovered they both wanted the same things: security, love, a place to belong. 6 weeks after Olivia had arrived at the ranch, Isaac took her into town on a Saturday. He held her hand as they walked down the main street, and she could see people noticing, whispering. Let them talk, she thought. She was proud to be with him, proud of what they were building together. They stopped at the general store, and Isaac bought her a length of beautiful green fabric that matched her eyes. At the bakery, he insisted on purchasing a whole pie just because she mentioned it smelled good. And then, in front of the small jewelry shop, he stopped and turned to face her. Olivia Lawson, I know this might seem fast to some people, but it feels right to me. You feel right. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small diamond. Would you marry me? Not because you need security, not because you work for me, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. She looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the future she could see stretching out before them, bright and full of promise. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I will marry you. He slipped the ring on her finger right there on the street, and then he kissed her while people clapped and cheered around them. Martha came hurrying over from the boarding house, Penelope close behind, and they both hugged Olivia and told Isaac he was a lucky man. Even Thomas Henderson, who happened to be in town that day, saw them. He scowled and turned away, and Olivia felt nothing but pity for him. He would never know what he had missed by being so shallow, so focused on appearances that he could not see what truly mattered. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in San Jose, with half the town in attendance. Olivia wore a dress she had sewn herself from the green fabric Isaac had bought her, with wildflowers in her hair. Isaac wore a new suit and looked so handsome she could barely breathe when she saw him waiting at the altar. Carlos and Miguel served as witnesses, and Martha cried happy tears, and the whole day felt like something out of a dream. The ranch became truly theirs after that, not just his or hers, but something they built together. Olivia continued to run the household, but now it was her home, not just her workplace. She planted a larger garden, started canning vegetables for winter, learned to make cheese from the milk cow Isaac bought. Isaac expanded the herd, built a new barn, invested in better breeding stock. They worked hard, but they also made time for each other, for long evenings on the porch, for Sunday rides, for quiet moments in front of the fire. Their first winter together was mild by California standards, but there were storms that kept them inside for days at a time. Olivia did not mind. She spent the time reading Isaac's books, sewing curtains for the windows, teaching him how to braid bread. He taught her to play chess, to identify different stars, to appreciate the particular silence of a snow-covered landscape. By spring, Olivia knew she was pregnant. She told Isaac one morning at breakfast, watching his face transform from surprise to joy to something so tender, it made her throat tight. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are," she laughed, giddy with happiness. "In the fall, I think, late October or early November." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have made me the happiest man alive, Olivia Vaughn." The pregnancy was not easy. Olivia was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, exhausted all the time. Isaac hovered, worried, and finally hired a young woman from town named Sarah to help with the housework. Olivia protested at first, but she had to admit it was a relief to have the help, especially as she grew larger and more uncomfortable. Isaac was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He insisted she rest more, do less, take care of herself. He read to her in the evenings, rubbed her aching feet, brought her meals in bed when she was too tired to come downstairs. And when she cried for no reason except that her body felt foreign and overwhelming, he held her and told her she was beautiful and strong and everything would be all right. In late October, on a cool, clear night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Olivia went into labor. Isaac rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch the midwife, and then he paced the house like a caged animal while she labored upstairs. Martha had come to help, and she eventually ordered him outside, telling him he was making everyone nervous. The labor was long and difficult. Olivia had known it would be, had heard stories from other women, but nothing quite prepared her for the reality of it. She screamed until her voice was hoarse, gripped Martha's hand until she left bruises, and there were moments when she thought she might die, when the pain was so intense she could not imagine surviving it. But then, just as dawn was breaking, the baby came. A boy, small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that announced his arrival to anyone within hearing distance. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Olivia's arms, and she looked down at his tiny, perfect face and felt love so fierce it was almost frightening. Isaac came in moments later, his face pale and anxious until he saw them both alive and well. Then he sank down on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down his face, and touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered. "You are perfect. I love you so much." They named him James after Isaac's father, and he became the center of their world. Isaac was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, making silly faces to coax out smiles. Olivia marveled at the sight of her strong rancher husband cradling their tiny son, singing off-key lullabies, completely transformed by this small person. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved the ranch animals and followed his father everywhere. When he was 2, Olivia became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after Olivia's mother. Clara was easier than James had been, a calm baby who slept through the night early and smiled at everyone. The ranch continued to prosper. Isaac's reputation for quality cattle spread, and buyers came from as far as San Francisco to purchase his stock. He hired more hands, built a second barn, bought more land. Olivia managed the household with Sarah's help, raised their children, maintained the garden that had become famous in the area for its abundance. She also started teaching reading to some of the ranch hands who had never learned, holding informal classes in the evenings at the kitchen table. When James was 5 and Clara was 3, Olivia became pregnant for the third time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and she was often sick and exhausted. Isaac worried constantly, insisting she rest, taking over more of the child care himself. In early spring of 1885, she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Elizabeth. The birth was frightening, complicated by the fact that there were 2 babies and there was bleeding that scared everyone. But the midwife was skilled and Martha was steady, and Olivia survived, though she was weak for weeks afterward. Isaac hired more help for the house and took on less ranch work himself, staying close to home during those early months. He brought Olivia meals, helped with the babies, entertained James and Clara when they grew restless. And gradually, Olivia regained her strength, and life found a new rhythm with 4 children filling the house with noise and laughter. The children grew, each with their own personality. James was serious and responsible, already showing signs of inheriting his father's work ethic. Clara was creative and dreamy, always drawing pictures or making up elaborate stories. Daniel was mischievous and fearless, constantly getting into trouble. Elizabeth was quiet and thoughtful, happiest with a book in her lap. Olivia and Isaac grew too, not apart but deeper together. They had weathered challenges, difficult births, harsh winters, cattle diseases, the everyday struggles of running a ranch and raising a family. But through it all, they had each other. They still made time for quiet moments on the porch, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still kissed like newlyweds when they thought the children were not looking. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Olivia back to the place he had first shown her, the hill where you could see for miles. They left the children with Martha and Sarah and rode out in the late afternoon, carrying a picnic supper. They sat on a blanket and watched the sun set, the sky turning gold and crimson and deep purple, and they talked about the life they had built. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked. "Staying here, marrying me instead of going back east or finding something different?" Olivia looked at him, at the face she knew as well as her own, at the man who had saved her when she thought she had nothing left, who had loved her not despite her height, but because of everything she was. "Not for a single second," she said. "This life, this ranch, our children, this is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it." He pulled her close, and she tucked herself against his side, fitting perfectly as she always had. "I thank God every day that Henderson was such a fool," Isaac said, "because his loss was the greatest gift I ever received." They stayed on that hill until the stars came out, talking about the future. James was old enough now to start learning real ranch work, and Isaac wanted to teach him properly. Clara had expressed interest in going to school in town, and they were trying to figure out how to make that work. The twins were still young, but already showing signs of their own interests and talents. The ranch was doing well enough that they could afford to expand further, maybe hire a proper foreman to take some of the burden off Isaac's shoulders. "I would like to travel someday," Olivia said thoughtfully. "Show the children the ocean, maybe visit San Francisco. I have heard it is quite a city now." "We will do that," Isaac promised. "Maybe next summer when things are slower, we could make a whole adventure of it." As they rode back to the ranch under the stars, Olivia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The heartbreak of her parents' deaths, the loneliness of Boston, the desperate hope that had driven her to answer an advertisement from a stranger, the humiliation of being rejected in the street for something as insignificant as her height, the fear and uncertainty of those first days in San Jose. And then Isaac, appearing like something out of a story, offering not just work but kindness, not just shelter but respect. The slow unfurling of friendship into love, the discovery that she had found exactly what she needed in the last place she expected. A home, a family, a man who thought she was perfect exactly as she was. The ranch house came into view, lights glowing in the windows, and Olivia could see Sarah moving around in the kitchen. James would be getting the twins ready for bed, and Clara would be trying to stay awake to see them come home. It was a full, chaotic, beautiful life, and it was hers. Isaac helped her down from her horse, and they stood for a moment in the yard, his arms around her, her head resting against his chest. "I love you," he said, the words as familiar now as breathing but no less meaningful. "I love you too," she replied. "Thank you for seeing me that day, for taking a chance on a short woman who had nowhere else to go." He laughed softly. "You were never too short, Olivia. You were exactly right. For me, for this life, for everything. You were perfect then, and you are perfect now." They walked into the house together, into the warmth and noise and love that filled every room, and Olivia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. The seasons turned, bringing planting and harvest, branding and sales, the endless cycle of work that defined their existence. But beyond the work, there was richness in the small moments. Sunday dinners with the whole family crowded around the table, Christmas mornings with handmade gifts and excited children, summer evenings catching fireflies in the meadow. James turned 16 and became Isaac's right hand on the ranch, tall and strong and capable. He had his father's calm temperament and his mother's kindness, and already the other ranch hands respected him. Clara finished school and surprised everyone by declaring she wanted to be a teacher, and Isaac and Olivia arranged for her to attend a teacher's college in Sacramento. It was hard to let her go, but they were proud of her ambition. The twins grew into teenagers, Daniel still wild and adventurous, Elizabeth still quiet but with a sharp intelligence that impressed everyone who knew her. They talked of their futures too. Daniel wanted to explore, maybe join a cattle drive north, see more of the country. Elizabeth wanted to study medicine, inspired by the midwife who had delivered her and all her siblings. "When did they all grow up?" Olivia asked Isaac one night, watching their children from the porch. They were young adults now, not the babies she remembered so clearly. "Gradually and then all at once," Isaac said, his arm around her shoulders. "But they are good people, Olivia. We did well with them. We did." She leaned against him, comfortable in the way that came from decades of knowing someone completely. There was silver in her dark hair now, and lines around her eyes, but Isaac still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. They had grandchildren eventually, as the children married and started families of their own. James married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and had 3 children. Clara married a teacher she met in Sacramento and had 2. Daniel did leave for a while, working cattle drives and seeing the country, but he eventually came home and settled down with a widow who had a young son. Elizabeth went to medical school, one of the few women in her class, and became a doctor in San Jose, though she never married, declaring she was too busy with her practice. Olivia and Isaac grew old together on the ranch that had been their whole world. Isaac's hair turned silver, and he moved a bit slower, his joints aching on cold mornings. Olivia's hands grew stiff from arthritis, making sewing difficult, but she still tended her garden every day she was able. They turned more of the ranch operations over to James and his sons, content to take a less active role, to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, a gathering that filled the house to bursting. Someone asked Isaac to tell the story of how he and Olivia met, and he did, his voice still strong even if his body was not. I saw her sitting on a bench in town, looking lost and fierce at the same time, and I knew I had to know her, he said, his hand finding Olivia's across the table. Best decision I ever made, offering her that job. Second best decision was convincing her to marry me. You did not have to convince very hard, Olivia said, smiling at the memories. I was already half in love with you by then. The grandchildren demanded to hear more stories, and they obliged, sharing tales of the early years, of building the ranch, of storms and droughts and small victories. They talked about the hard times and the good times, about the life they had built from almost nothing, about the love that had sustained them through everything. As the evening wound down and families departed for their own homes, Olivia and Isaac sat once again on the porch, in chairs that had been replaced multiple times over the decades, but always positioned in the same spot. The stars were bright overhead, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed softly. "You remember what you said to me that first night we kissed?" Olivia asked. "I said a lot of things that night. You said I was the perfect height for your arms." She smiled at the memory. "I think about that sometimes, about how Henderson rejected me for being too short and how you saw it as exactly right." Isaac reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "You were exactly right, are exactly right. Everything about you, Olivia, everything about us." They sat in comfortable silence, and Olivia thought about the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. If someone had told her, that day she stepped off the stagecoach in San Jose, that she would end up here with a husband who adored her, with children and grandchildren, with a ranch that thrived, with a life full of love and purpose, she would not have believed them. The rejection that had felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning. Isaac died peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning 5 years later, at the age of 73. He had been healthy and active until the very end, working on the ranch just days before. Olivia woke to find him beside her, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers even in death. The grief was enormous, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe, but beneath it was gratitude for the 45 years they had shared, for every moment they had been given. She lived 3 more years after that. Years spent surrounded by family, by the ranch that had been their dream, by the garden she still tended even when her hands shook. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about their great-grandfather, about the man who had seen past her height to everything she could be, who had loved her with a steadiness that never wavered. On a quiet morning in early autumn, with the California hills golden in the sunrise and her garden still blooming despite the season, Olivia passed away in her sleep, in the same bed where she had slept beside Isaac for so many years. Her family found her with a slight smile on her face, and they liked to think she had gone to join him, that somewhere beyond the veil, they were together again. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapters to the story that had begun with a rejected mail-order bride and a rancher who saw her true worth. And in the family Bible, carefully preserved through the years, there was an inscription in Isaac's handwriting on the page documenting their marriage. "Olivia Lawson became Olivia Vaughn on this day, and my life became complete. She was the perfect height for my arms, and everything else about her was perfect too." It was a love story that started with rejection and ended with a legacy that touched countless lives. It was proof that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, that closed doors can open pathways to something better than you ever imagined, and that real love sees beyond the surface to the heart of who someone truly is. The town of San Jose grew and changed over the decades, becoming a city, modernizing, transforming into something the pioneers who founded it would barely recognize. But the Vaughn Ranch remained, a piece of living history, and the story of how it began was told and retold through the generations. A tale of a woman who was rejected for being too short and a man who said she was exactly right. It was a story about taking chances, about seeing value where others saw only flaws, about building something lasting from the ruins of disappointment. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Isaac and Olivia had lived every day of their lives together. That love is not about finding someone who meets an arbitrary standard, but about finding someone who fits your heart, your life, your arms, exactly as they are. Someone who is perfect not in spite of their imperfections, but because those imperfections are part of what makes them uniquely, wonderfully themselves.